Konnichiwa and welcome, history nerds and other interested parties. My name's Casey Connell. I'm the historian for the 18th Wing, and I'm here to give you a little brief overview of the Battle for Okinawa and a little bit about the historic sites that you might find if you go out and explore Kadena Air Base. So let's get started on the tour of the Battle of Okinawa and also the historic sites that you're going to find on Kadena. First of all, what I want to talk about is that the Air Force History Museums program has historians usually at every air base or most air bases within the Air Force. The 18th Wing History Office is located in Building 404. What historians do for the Air Force is we provide an annual history for the wing, group, or squadron that we're working for. We also do briefs like this. We also provide base tours. Not so much in every Air Force base, but base tours are pretty much a full-time job here on Okinawa and at Kadena Air Base. We also provide information requests. So if you are a former Air Force airman who needs some information about a station he was at or some of the service he did, you can usually contact your Air Force historian and they should be able to help you with the unit that you were with. We also do squadron support. So if you have a squadron that you need some lineage and honors, some background information for, we'll help you with that as well. Now before we begin and get into the brief, I want to talk a little bit about the historic sources that you can use. Some of them are definitive in the sense that they're the best out there. Other historic sources I might not mention that you might know of. There are a lot of books about the Battle of Okinawa. I'm just going to mention a few. The first historic source that you're going to see up top there is the Kadena Air Force homepage. We do have a little link to that. It's under library. If you go to the homepage, you'll see a link for library. Under that, you'll see history, and in that link, you're going to find a lot about the history of Kadena Air Base and some documents as well that can provide you with information on the history of the 18th Wing and Kadena. The most definitive work that you're going to find on the Battle of Okinawa is with the U.S. Army Center for Military History, and you're going to see that they have a website at www.history.army.mil. When you get to that website, you're going to see a link. It's going to say the Green Book series. You're going to want to go to that link and click on that link. The Green Book series is basically all the histories that have been written about all the World War II battles and all the theater of operations that the military units took place in throughout the world. So you're going to look for the Pacific Theater, and when you see the Pacific Theater, you're going to click on that. And under that, you're going to see a variety of books on the operations in the Pacific Theater of Operations. The one you're going to look for is by Appleman, Roy E. It's going to be called Okinawa: The Last Battle. Now you can download this off the website free of charge. It's a PDF file. I do have to warn you that this book is about 680 pages long, but it is the most definitive work on the Battle of Okinawa that you're going to find. There's also a campaign series that the U.S. Army Center for Military History did as well. This is, you're going to look for the Ryukyus under the World War II campaign brochure by Arnold G. Fish, F-I-S-C-H. That's a little bit shorter. It's only about 40 pages long, but it'll also provide you a good overview of the Battle of Okinawa and what took place. Now also on this slide, you're going to see some other books that I feel are important that you're going to need to look at if you're really interested in the Battle of Okinawa. The top one there is by Hiromichi Yahara. Now, Hiromichi Yahara was the operations officer. He was a colonel in the 32nd Army, and he was the operations officer for Lieutenant General Mitsuru Yusujima. When the battle ended, or was towards the end of the battle on June 19th, 1945, when Yusujima and his second-in-command Major General Isamuro Cho, decided to commit harikari or seppuku, ritual suicide, whatever you want to call it. Yahara wanted to do it as well, but they asked him to stay alive so that he could escape after the battle ended, and in doing so he would get back to Tokyo and retell his view of the battle and what took place to the Imperial General Headquarters. He did not make it back to Tokyo. He actually was able to survive for 2 weeks without being captured, but he was eventually captured by American forces. Nonetheless, he wrote a book called The Battle for Okinawa. Basically, it's the best version of the Japanese side of the battle. The next book you're going to see is by Hatsuho Nato, and that's Thunder Gods. The kamikaze pilots tell their stories. This is an excellent book as far as the kamikaze side of the battle, which was a big part of the Battle of Okinawa. It also talks about the Oka, or the cherry blossom, which was a piloted bomb, basically, is the best way to describe it. And it talks about that development up at Yokosuka Naval Station. Also, if you go to YouTube, if you're big into YouTube, there's a series called Battlefield. And if you type in Battlefield Destination Okinawa, you're going to find a series or an episode that's about an hour and a half long, but it's the best thing you're going to be able to find as far as a comprehensive view or video of the Battle of Okinawa, or for Okinawa. All right, let's talk a little bit about the battle. Operation Iceberg is what it was called. It's also referred to as the Typhoon of Steel. Typhoon of Steel is used because there was so much ordnance thrown on this island, both by U.S. naval forces and also by Army air forces, that this was called the Typhoon of Steel by the locals due to all the large number of shells thrown onto the island. First, let's talk about the Japanese units that were on the island. I mentioned the Japanese general in charge. He was Lieutenant General Mitsuru Yusujima. He was in command of the Japanese 32nd Army. He had his headquarters at Shuri Castle. Yusujima arrived on Okinawa around August of 1944. In doing so, he had a few months to provide the defense or build the defense for the coming invasion of Okinawa. His main forces were infantry at about 38,000 infantry. He did have some armor, although they weren't used in the sense that you would think of armor moving about. Most of his armor was placed in static defense positions. They also had an air force here. They had a variety of airfields here on Okinawa. In fact, the two main airfields, or one of the main airfields, was Yantan Airfield up near Yomitan Village. Kadena Airfield was in existence, but it was not a main field. It was an auxiliary field at the time. They also had some naval units under an Admiral Ota. He was positioned down at the Yoruku Peninsula down near Naha. And if you ever go down to Japanese Naval Underground, which is located just outside of Naha, you can see the signs for it. I encourage you to go. It's a great tour. You can see some great underground bunkers and get a feel for what it was like during the Battle of Okinawa at that position. Finally, they also had what they called boatai. Boatai was just a way of, you could kind of think of them as Okinawa Home Guard. These were about 20,000 Okinawan men and young boys who were sort of pressed into service. They weren't used as frontline troops, so most of them did not take part in the battle, and if they did, it was relatively for minor fighting. So total forces, Yusujima had about 100,000 Japanese and Okinawan forces to choose from when he decided to make battle with United States forces in the United States Marine Corps and Army. Let's talk a little bit about the forces that were brought to bear against the Japanese, the American forces, under the command of Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr., who's in command of the 10th Army. Lieutenant General Buckner spent most of his World War II period up in Alaska, defending Alaska from the Japanese attacks on Attu and Kiska. He was given command of this invasion force around October of '44 and used the preceding months to plan this invasion. Under him, he had two commands that were most important underneath him. He had the 24 Corps, which was the Southern Landing Force under Major General J.R. Hodge, United States Army. He also had the 3rd Amphibious Corps under Major General Roy S. Geiger, United States Marine Corps. The Southern Landing Force, the 24th Corps, comprised of the 96th Infantry Division and the 7th Infantry Division. And then the 3rd Amphibious Corps was the 1st Marine Division and the 6th Marine Division. He also had naval forces. He had a tactical air force under the command of Major General F.P. Mulcahy, United States Marine Corps. He also had a division of Marines, the 2nd Marine Division, that was going to do a feint on the southern side of the island during the day of the invasion. 2nd Marine Division did not land during that feint. They actually moved toward the beach and then turned around as soon as they got close enough in order to fool the Japanese into thinking that was where the invasion was taking place. It was over by the village of Minatoga. The Japanese were so fooled by this feint that they actually thought this was the invasion that was taking place. After the 2nd Marine Division made their feint, they actually returned to Saipan, but would return to Okinawa later during the battle. He also had the 27th Infantry Division, U.S. Army, which was basically a police force, and he had the 77th Infantry Division, which was the Western Landing Force. And the 77th Infantry Division fought not only on Okinawa, but islands surrounding Okinawa as well. Here you see the commanders. On your left, you see Lieutenant General Mitsuru Yusujima, and on your right, you see General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr. Both generals died during the battle. Kind of unique, and as you can see by their dates, they were pretty much the same age during the battle as well. Okay, Japanese defensive positions. What you have is when Yusujima had to decide how to defend the island, he wasn't defending the island in order to stop the Americans. The Japanese Imperial Headquarters and Yusujima both knew from previous battles that he could not hold Okinawa. What he needed to do was devise a defensive situation where he was going to bleed the American forces as much as possible. So what he did is he placed most of his army in the southern part of Okinawa. As you can see from this slide, he's got the 67th Division located around Shuri Castle, his command headquarters. As I mentioned, he has the naval forces over on the Oroku Peninsula, and he has the 24th Infantry Division in the southern part on the Chinen Peninsula in reserve. He also has a 44th Independent Mixed Brigade over by Yanabaru, and he does place a small amount of forces up near Nago under the command of a lieutenant colonel. But as you can see on this slide, he does not place any forces in order to defend the beaches. Yusujima knew from prior experience at Iwo Jima at Saipan that in order to survive, you could not really take on the U.S. Navy when they were doing an amphibious landing, due to the fact that they would provide so much firepower in support of that amphibious landing that you would basically be wasting your forces against this naval force. So what he did is he did not contest the beaches. And as you can see here, the beaches were located right along the seawall, or what would be today would be the Kadena Marina, American Village, and then of course Yomitan Village. Here's the plan of attack. As you can see, this is what was going to take place when they hit the beaches. But as you can see off to the left there, you have a set of islands off to the left away from Okinawa. Those are known as the Kurama Reto Islands. This is a small group of islands that Buckner needed to neutralize before he could effect the landing on April 1st, 1945, and that's where the 77th Infantry Division came into play. They actually had to neutralize these islands because of a threat of suicide boats that were present on the islands. This is what they were. They were called the Shinro, or the Sea Quakes, and there were a high number of these boats on the Kurama Reto Islands. 77th Infantry Division took the islands of the Kurama Reto and found these Sea Quakes. And if you go to that Destination Okinawa YouTube video, you actually see 77th Infantry Division soldiers driving around the Kurama Retos in these boats. The boats were called suicide boats. What was to take place was you had the Japanese sailor in the back driving the boat with a explosive charge in the front. They would sally forth and attack the transports and the U.S. Navy ships. They were technically supposed to jump out before the boat hit the ship, but it was a suicide mission because you couldn't really jump out in time before it hit the ship in order to survive the blast. One interesting fact about these suicide boats is they were actually powered by 6-cylinder Chevy engines, so it was a little bit of our technology being used against us at the time. Okay, after the Kurama Reto Islands were neutralized from March 26th to April 1st or March 30th, we have the actual landing on April 1st, 1945. As you can see on this map, you have the 1st and 6th Marine Divisions landing up by Yomitan Village, north of the Bishigawa River. That's in the center. That's the dividing line for the Marines and the Army. The Marines had the task of taking Yantan Airfield, which was a major airfield at the time on Okinawa, used by the Japanese. The Yantan Airfield does not exist today, but if you want to find it and go see where it was at, what you're going to do is you're going to take Highway 6 towards Tori Station. And once you get to that stoplight in front of Torii Station, instead of taking a left into Torii Station, you're going to take a right at that stoplight, go up the hill, and once you plateau on top of that hill, you're basically where Yantan Airfield was. Yantan Airfield, as I said, was a main airfield, and it was used by us after the Marines captured it on April 1st. The other airfield, of course, is Kadena Airfield. That was the task of the 7th Infantry Division. The 7th Infantry Division thought that the Kadena Airfield would take 3 days. It would be taken by D+3. It was taken within the first 12 hours. So again, the defenses on the beaches trying to contest the beaches or trying to fight the Americans, there was no defense there. So what you have is the Americans landing. It's April 1st. It's April Fool's Day. Some of them thought it was an April Fool's joke that they were not receiving any enemy fire or any enemy action when they hit the beach. So they moved relatively quickly to consolidate their beach areas and to start their move inland. Now when the Marines took Yantan, their task was to move north and secure the northern part of the island, and then the 7th and 96th Infantry Divisions were going to swing south and secure the southern part of the island. Just an idea of what the first movements were from probably April 1st through April 8th. The landings were made. As you can see here, the Marines secured the area around Yomitan Village, and the Army secures the part around Kadena Airfield and then moves across the island to secure the center of the island before the Marines can move north and before the Army can move south. Okay, the Marines, they're the ones who start their move. The Army does start moving relatively quickly after they land, but they have to consolidate their position. So the Marines start making their move north from April 4th through April 8th. The Marines do not have a lot of resistance as they move north. The main problem with the Marines is trying to find decent roads in order to get north. But once they do get up to Nago, then they run into that mixed brigade or that battalion that was placed there by Yusujima. And then they start finding a little rough and heavier fighting. And they fight around Mount Yadaki, which is up towards Nago, up near Nago. And they actually have a pretty bloody fight for the rest of the month of April. It isn't until end of April, 1st May, that they have secured the northern part of the island. All right, let's talk a little bit about the historic sites here on Kadena. There are a number of historic sites on Kadena. What you have, most of them, or all of them, I should say, are marked. They have large historic markers in front of them. The first one most people go to, or the most well-known one here on Kadena Air Base, is what's called Hospital Cave. Hospital Cave can be found right before the entrance of the Banyan Tree Golf Course. If you're driving towards Banyan Tree, off to the left, you're going to see the historic marker. There's a small parking area. You can get out and walk up to what's called Hospital Cave. Now, it's a little bit of a misnomer. This wasn't an actual hospital cave. What they found were first aid equipment, gauzes, bandages, litters, that sort of thing. So it became Hospital Cave. But what it actually is it's a gun position. When you walk up to the front of the cave where you see the fence there, if you look down at the floor, you're going to see bolts coming out of the floor. That's a gun mount. So they actually had probably, I'm guessing at it, but about a 6-inch naval gun within the mouth of that cave. And also you can see that the construction of the cave with the concrete being used, that Yusujima from that period from August of 44 up until April 1st of 1945 had a lot of time to build some very good defensive positions, use concrete and rebar, and make some heavy positions that were going to be tough for the Marines and the U.S. Army to crack. What's nice about the Hospital Cave complex is it's built on the side of a hill. So during those winter months or those non-Habu times, because you don't want to be traipsing in the jungle when the Habu are out, you want to look around and explore this area. There are a number of other things on this hill around Hospital Cave. The other thing that you're going to find is right before you get to Hospital Cave, you're going to see to your right off the trail what you might call a water filtration building or plant. If you go back around there, you're going to see a trail that leads up to the top of the hill. And at the top of the hill, you're going to find this. This is a 3-slit or a 2-slit observation post machine gun nest. You can climb up to it. Just be careful. Again, watch your step. And also, if you go around to the other side of the hill and climb up behind the actual hospital cave emplacement, you're going to find another observation bunker as well. The other thing you're going to find on Kadena is you're going to look, if you go down Douglas Avenue as you're heading towards Gate 3, right before you get to Gate 3, you're going to look to your right and you're going to find what we call the Oka Revetments. These are hangars, again, built of concrete, that were used to house the Oka or the cherry blossom. This was it was a parasite aircraft. It was developed prior to the Battle of Okinawa and after the Battle of the Philippines. The use of this aircraft is basically to try to breach the anti-aircraft defenses of the United States Navy. During the Battle of the Philippines, the Japanese kamikazes, where they were developed during the Battle of the Philippines, they had trouble breaking through the anti-aircraft fire of the U.S. Navy. The Vals, the Kates, and the Zeros that were being used, the propeller-driven planes, were having trouble getting through those defenses because they were slow, they were propeller-driven. So during that period, the Japanese Navy up at Yakuza decided to build something that could penetrate these anti-aircraft defenses. So what they did is they took basically a wooden glide bomb, had it piloted, put a 2,600-pound warhead in the nose, and attached rockets on the back in order to increase the speed as it was diving towards its target. Here you see an interior of the Oka hangar. This is an actual photo of a Betty with the Oka below it. The Oka is attached to the Betty. So the Betty bomber that you see in the photo would take off from Kanoya Naval Air Base up near Kagoshima in the Kyushu Islands. It would fly towards the target. The pilot would be in the Betty during the flight, but as it got close to its target, the pilot would go down into the Oka or cherry blossom, get into the cherry blossom, and then detach from the Betty bomber when it got close enough to its target, and then glide towards its target. As it got closer to the target, it would ignite the rocket engines and reach speeds up to about 560 miles an hour. That's fast enough for any gunner on any ship, making it difficult to hit. This is the Oka, or the cherry blossom, the I-18 that was found on Kadena by the United States Army in those revetments that you see off Douglas Avenue. They did not know the Okas were there. Photo reconnaissance did not pick up the hangars, and so when they came onto the island, when they invaded the island, they were surprised to find these. None of the Okas were used from Okinawa were used against the U.S. Navy. But the kamikazes were used, and the kamikazes were a big part of the Battle of Okinawa. It started around April 4th, about 3 days after the landings. Basically, there were two plans. The first plan was for Yusujima to have the Americans land on Okinawa and then to tie them in place, to keep the Navy out there off the shores of Okinawa. The second operation or plan was to bring in swarms of kamikazes to basically destroy the United States Navy as it was sitting off the shores of Okinawa. And so, due to the fact that there was such a large increase in large use of kamikazes against the United States Navy during the Battle of Okinawa, the United States Naval Forces actually took the highest rate of casualties during the battle. As you can see in this slide, the USS Bunker Hill was hit by kamikazes. Now, although the kamikazes wanted to hit capital ships like battleships and aircraft carriers, the brunt of the damage taken by the kamikaze attacks were by the destroyers and landing craft that were off the shores of Okinawa. The destroyers were a favorite target because when we invaded Okinawa, the U.S. Navy set up a destroyer screen on the northern end off Okinawa. So when all these kamikazes were coming down from those air bases on the Kyushu, their first attacks, or their first target of attack, were those destroyers that were first seen by those kamikazes coming down from the south. One of the most famous actions against those destroyers, the U.S. Navy destroyers, was against a ship called the USS Lafayette. This took place 16th April 1945. As you can see in this slide, the Lafayette survived almost 20 plus attacks by various planes. No Okas were involved. You can see on the slide you have VALs and all other types of planes as well. But the Lafayette, even though it took that many attacks, was able to survive and was able to get back to its port in order to be repaired. There is a book called The Ship That Would Not Die, and that's about the story of the battle of the USS Lafayette. Okay, let's talk a little bit about tactical air cover here on Okinawa, or during the Battle of Okinawa. All tactical air cover was provided by the United States Marine Corps. VMF 312 was the first fighter squadron to operate from Kadena. On the lower right, you see Major General Francis P. Mulcahy, who is in charge of the Tactical Air Command. The Marines flew out of both Yomitan and Kadena. There were other Marine squadrons as well. There was VMF 322 and 323 as well. All right, one of the stories I want to talk about during the battle that took place is Operation Tengo. Although this battle did not take place on Okinawa, or really near Okinawa, it's important of the fact that it was the sinking of the biggest battleship that the Japanese built during World War II, and it was the biggest battleship in the world at the time. If you're not familiar with it, it was the battleship Yamato. And the Yamato was actually built prior to the war. It was a highly secretive project for the Imperial Japanese Navy. The Yamato did not see much action. They kept it close to home and kept it up near Hiroshima at Kiri Naval Base. But it was at that time, during the Imperial Japanese headquarters briefings and meetings with the Emperor, that it was seen that they have this large battleship called the Yamato, and it was time for the Yamato to make its debut, so to speak. So the Yamato, with destroyer and cruiser escort, left Kiri Naval Base. As you can see up in the Honshu Island, came through past the Kyushu and Shikoku Islands and moved out. And as soon as it left pretty much the inland waters of the Japanese Sea, it was sighted by a U.S. submarine. It made a pretty good speed and got around the southern tip of the Kyushu Islands, but it was sighted again by airplanes from the USS Essex out of Task Force 58 under Admiral Mark Michener. Once it was sighted, the aircraft carrier forced the Task Force 58, sent its planes aloft, and the Yamato was attacked as well as its escort, and it was sunk northwest of Okinawa. It went down rather quickly. If you go online, you could YouTube, just put in Yamato, sinking of Yamato, and you'll actually see the actual sinking of the ship. And as I said, once you look at that, you'll see how fast it went down. It took minutes for the ship to sink after it was bombarded by aircraft carrier planes. This is a slide of 20 April 1945, Kadena Airfield. What we have here is, you can see the U.S. Marine Corps Corsairs, and you can see that Kadena Airfield, not much to it, just a strip of coral. But again, like most of the close air support provided by the Marines during most of the battles of the Pacific, it was one of those where the Marine Corsairs would take off, and probably before they even got aloft, they would be dropping their napalm or firing their rockets on Japanese positions. Let's talk a little bit about the Army's first battle, and this is the attack on Kakazu Ridge, which is April 1945. It was made by the 1st and 3rd Battalions of the 383rd Infantry. Kakazu Ridge, along with what was called the Battle for the Pinnacle, were the two main battles that started off the battle for the southern part of Okinawa. Now you can go to Kakazu Ridge today and you can see the caves that were built, and you can also see a pillbox that was used by the Japanese, and get a feel for the defensive positions that these ridge lines created for the Japanese and also were a burden on the American forces attacking them. If you drive down Highway 58, you'll get down to, I believe it's Highway 34, and you'll see a sign for Kakazu Memorial Park. You'll take a left onto 34, you'll go up the road about another kilometer, and then you'll see another sign for Kakazu Memorial Park, and you'll take a right. Go about maybe half a click, and you'll just follow the signs all the way to Kakazu Ridge. Again, a good example of the attacks. There are many panels there that explain the Battle of Kakazu Ridge to you, and you can also see a wall that was hit by American Sherman tanks shell fire during the battle. The pinnacle is a little bit tougher to get to, but it's also a good place to go, because from the pinnacle there's a machine gun pillbox observation post there, and if you get on top of it, be careful when you get on top, but when you get on top and if you bring a good pair of binoculars, you can actually see Kadena Air Base from there. You can see Kakazu Ridge. So from that point on the pinnacle, you can actually get a good view of the entire front line of the first line of Japanese defense and see how all these ridge lines interconnect to provide interconnecting fields of fire. The pinnacle is a little bit tougher to find. You need to go over on the eastern side of the island over by Ryukyu University. The best way to find the pinnacle is the Okinawa Prefectural Fire Academy is right next to it. So if you're driving over by Ryukyu University and you can find the Okinawa Prefectural Fire Academy, right on the back side of that you will see the trail, and you'll also have markers that will indicate this area. And once you get to the end of it, as I said, you'll see the pillbox. There's also a cave there that you can get into. Be careful again when you're climbing into the cave. But if you get up on top of that pillbox, again, be careful when you're doing so, and you have a good pair of binoculars, you can get a good view of that front line of defense and see those interconnecting fields of fire. Okay, as I talked about, the Marines fighting up north in April of '45. This is the map for the battle of around Nagu and the Motobu Peninsula. Again, Marines had a tough fight, but once they got the fighting up north taken care of, by May 1st, they had secured the northern end. At this point, Buckner needed the Marines down south, so he asked Major General Pedro de Valle of the 1st Marine Division to bring his forces down south, and he basically just did a switch. He brought the Marines down south, and then he took that 27th Infantry Division of the U.S. Army and moved them up north to police the north during the continuance of the battle. Another battle that's quite famous, not on Okinawa but darn close, is the battle for Ieshima. Ieshima Island is a very small island, but it was important in the fact that it was manned by Japanese soldiers, and the 77th Infantry Division was actually tasked to take that island. It was taken from 16th to 21st April 1945. You can get to Ieshima Island today. Go up to the Motobu ferry port. You pay $13 or about $13 for a round trip. You cannot bring your car onto the island, but you might want to bring your mountain bike, but the island's so small that you can also walk around the island as well. There's a tall hill or a peak on the island that dominates the island, and you can climb up there. Once you get to the top of that peak or hill, you can take a look around and see how that was a good spot for observation when the Americans invaded Ieshima. One of the other aspects of the battle for Ieshima is the death of Ernie Pyle. If you're not familiar with Ernie Pyle, he was a famous World War II correspondent, spent most of his time in the European theater of operations, alongside U.S. Army units in both Italy and France. After the war ended May 1945, instead of returning home like most of his European theater of operation buddies, he decided to go see what was taking place in the Pacific theater of operations. Ernie Pyle was with the commander of the 77th Infantry Division during the Battle of Ieshima. They were riding in a Jeep. They came under sniper fire, took cover in a ditch. Mr. Pyle decided to take a look over the ditch, and when he did so, he was shot in the head by that sniper, thus killed on Ieshima. He was given a memorial for his service on Ieshima. When Ieshima was returned to the Japanese or Okinawan people after the reversion in 1972, they left that memorial there. They did have the ability to remove it, but they understood what a famous American Ernie Pyle was, so they left the memorial there. When you go to Yusujima and you land at the ferry landing, what you'll do is you get off the ferry and go to your left up the main road, and the memorial is pretty prominent. You can see it there in the photo. You'll see it after you walk about about a mile or two up the road. Yusujima is also important because it did have airfields on the island as well, and this is where the United States Army Air Forces come into play. They based P-47 Thunderbolts on the island, and those were used to support not only air cover during the kamikaze attacks, but also support the bombers that were going towards Japan as well. Here we got the lay of the battle during May of 1945. What you see in the center there is Shuri Castle. That is the command post of Lieutenant General Mitsuru Yusujima. Right around where Camp Kinser would be today, you see the 6th Marine Division. Next in line to them is the 1st Marine Division. You also have the 77th Infantry Division in the line. They came from Yusujima and now they're on Okinawa. You also have the 96th Infantry Division next to them, and then around Yanabaru you have the 7th Infantry Division as well. This is basically the main battle that takes place during the battle for Okinawa. You can see Naha down there to the lower left, and this was a static battle line for most of the month of most of the month of May and a little bit of April. It was towards the end of May that Yusujima finally had too much of an attack and lost many troops in a counterattack that was proposed by his second-in-command, Lieutenant General Isamuro Cho, which Yusujima did not want to do, but Cho finally convinced him. The attack was made both on land and on sea through amphibious attacks against the 6th Marine Division and against the 7th Infantry Division over by Yanabaru. Both of these attacks failed miserably. 6th Marine Division was able to basically kill most of the Japanese soldiers that were making that amphibious landing near what today is Camp Kinser before they even hit the beaches. After that attack was made, the rains came, as they do almost every May on Okinawa, which turned most of the land into a muddy mire. So what you have then is the advance of the U.S. forces is slowed down in this muddy environment. Some of the forces had to be resupplied by air because trucks could not make it up to the front line. But Yusujima takes advantage of this slowdown in the American advance, and it is during late May that he starts to plan his retreat out of what they call the Shuri Line. And he does so very well. He makes a good tactical retreat out of the Shuri Line, and he does such a good job that the Americans actually don't know that the Japanese have left their fighting positions. But once he makes that retreat, the Americans are able to advance quickly and thus end the battle by mid-June. What you see here is probably one of the more famous battles for the United States Marine Corps. It's called the Battle for Sugarloaf. Sugarloaf, below there you can see Sugarloaf. This is what you would think of as a small hill, but this was probably the worst battle that the Marine Corps had to fight other than the Motobu Peninsula on the for the Battle of Okinawa. They lost their highest casualty rate there. There was also the death of a Major Harry Courtney, and Major Courtney, due to his actions during the Battle of Sugarloaf, was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously, and Camp Courtney on Okinawa today is named after him. There's a view of Sugarloaf. As you can see, when I mentioned the Typhoon of Steel, you can see if you come to Okinawa today, or if you're on Okinawa right now, it's a pretty lush jungle environment. But back during the battle for Okinawa, you have almost a denuded landscape. There's not a tree standing. It is all pretty much gone due to the heavy shell fire that was given by the United States Navy battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, and also by the United States Marine Corps Tactical Air Force. Sugarloaf can be found. It's not too hard to find. What you'll do is you'll go down 58, and if you know where the Okinawa Prefectural Museum of Art is and the duty-free store, you'll go down that boulevard. On the left, you can see a view of the duty-free store. Across from the duty-free store, you'll see the water tower that is on the right. That is now Sugar Loaf. Sugar Loaf's a water tower. You can park. Parking's a little difficult, but once you park, you can climb up the stairs and get to the top of Sugar Loaf, and you'll see a small panel marking, giving a small history of the Battle of Sugarloaf Hill. There's Shuri Castle, pre-World War II. Again, Yusujima's command post was below Shuri Castle. If you go to Shuri Castle today, you cannot get into those areas where Yusujima and the Imperial Japanese Army had their command bunker. Shuri Castle was decimated in May of 1945 by shell fire from those United States naval battleships. So the Shuri Castle that you see today is a complete restoration. It is not the original Shuri Castle. All right, I mentioned withdrawal of the 32nd Army. Again, done late May, 25th May to 4 June 1945 by Yusujima. He basically moves all the way to the southern end of the island where Peace Prayer Park is today. Admiral Ota over at the Yoroku Peninsula at the naval base, he decides to stand and fight with his forces, but his forces are not crack troops. They're mediocre at best, but they do defend themselves and do take on the Marines that are around that area. The Marines move into Naha during Yusujima's retreat, but although this is their first urban fighting in the Pacific Theater of Operations, it is not heavy urban fighting because most of the Japanese forces have left Naha for the ridges surrounding Naha. So the fight for Naha is not that tough, but once they get out of Naha and start moving against those ridge lines around Naha, that's when the fight becomes a little bit tougher for the Marines. Okay, one thing I like to talk about during the Battle of Okinawa is the casualties among the Okinawan civilians that take place. And casualties, Okinawan civilians were killed both by United States Army forces and both by the forces of the Imperial Japanese Army. Who killed the most? Who can say? What you have, though, and this picture sort of kind of gives you a good idea, is most of the Okinawan civilians are in the caves with the Japanese soldiers. The Japanese soldiers are not going to let the Okinawans surrender, and they're not going to let them leave the cave. So when American forces come upon a cave entrance, they usually had second-generation Nisi Japanese interpreters, language interpreters, who were U.S. Army. And they would come up and they would try to coax the Japanese or the Okinawans out of the cave. Again, the Japanese would not allow them to surrender. So with the battle being fluid and usually these troops are under fire and having to move the battle, they would usually just throw a satchel charge in the cave to seal the cave and keep the battle moving. So this is where a high percentage of Okinawan civilian casualties take place. There's also a variety of Okinawan civilian casualties that are killed out in the open just by crossfire, shell fire, fire from both sides. So the Okinawan civilians take a high rate of casualties. There is no absolute figure on how many Okinawan civilians died during the battle for Okinawa, but there are estimates anywhere from 90 to 150,000. Also, not only satchel charges, but the Marines used M4 Sherman tanks that were equipped with flamethrowers. They would call them Zippo tanks, after the Zippo lighters that we know so well. And so heavy use of flamethrower tanks was also attributed to the high casualty rate among the civilians in the cave complexes. Okay, as I mentioned, both Yusujima and Buckner died during the battle for Okinawa. Buckner actually dies first. He is at a observation post of the 8th Marine Regiment, 2nd Marine Division on 18 June 1945. This is located down what today would be Itoman on Highway 331, just south of the airport, just east of the airport. What he does is Buckner and his command staff go to this observation post to see what was taking place during this battle. The Marines actually warned General Buckner of incoming shell fire from a 75mm Japanese field gun. He didn't seem too perturbed about this. So the first shell came in, hit close but not close enough. A second shell landed closer to Buckner, and he was hit in the chest with a sliver of coral and died 3 hours later of his wounds. With his death, the command of the entire forces on the island went to Major General Roy S. Geiger of the United States Marine Corps. And this is the first time a United States Marine Corps general has commanded U.S. Army forces in the field. So it's unique for that. You can go to the spot where Buckner was killed. If you take Highway 331 past the airport, past what is the Outlet Mall, on your way to what would be Peace Prayer Park, before you get, it's a 2-lane highway, 331, but it does go down to a 1-lane highway. Right before you get to that 1 lane, where it goes down to 1 lane, you're going to come to a stoplight. And above that stoplight, you're going to see a variety of signs. They're going to be signs for monuments, Japanese monuments. But at that stoplight, you're going to go left. You're going to go up the road about a half a kilometer. And on your right, you're going to see the Buckner Memorial. It can't be missed. It's well signed, and it's actually well taken care of. It's not hidden by any jungle. When you get up there, you can walk up to the hill where Buckner was standing when he was hit. There's also another memorial to Brigadier General Claude Easley of the 96th Infantry Division, who was killed by machine gun fire. He was not killed at that particular spot. According to other historians I've talked to, Easley was killed someplace else, but since they made the memorial for Buckner, they put up the memorial for Easley there as well. So even though Easley was killed during the battle, he was not killed at that spot. Buckner, however, was killed at the spot you'll be standing on. After 18 June, the battle ends rather quickly. You have Yusujima basically retreating all the way down to where Peace Prayer Park is today. Hill 89, as they called it. When you go into Peace Prayer Park, as you enter Peace Prayer Park, you look to your right and you'll see this ridge or hill kind of jutting out of the landscape. That's Hill 89. After you're done looking at Peace Prayer Park, you might want to go up and walk up on that hill. There is a road, and once you get on that road, you'll walk past a variety of memorials and monuments. As you go towards the end of the hill, towards the top, 2 things you might want to first check out. The first is a memorial on the left. It's the last memorial on your left. You'll see a panel there. What you'll see in the panel is you'll see Japanese troops coming out of airplanes attacking what is then Yantan Airfield. The Japanese did a special commando attack on Yantan Airfield. Again, like most of their attacks, it failed miserably. Most of them were killed before they even got out of the Betty bombers they attacked in. But that you'll see there is the monument in honor of those special attack corps. The other one is the cave that Yusujima was in at the end of the battle, and that he and General Cho committed suicide in front of during June 20th, 1945. You can go to the cave. You can't go in it, but you'll see the cave has been fenced off. But you will see enough signs to know that you are in the right place. It is a well-signed site. Okay, the final site that you're going to see is the surrender site. Even though the surrender was taken aboard the USS Missouri up in Tokyo Bay up in September 2nd, 1945, a surrender had to be conducted here on Okinawa. It was conducted September 7th, 1945. By that time, the U.S. Army had sent Lieutenant General Joe Stilwell to command the 10th Army. So he took the surrender from the Japanese generals that could be found around the Okinawan Islands. They found enough generals and admirals to surrender to. These are sites, these are photos of the surrender site. If you go down to Douglas Avenue and you go to the Fairchild Shoppette and the Burger King, that stoplight, hang a right, go up the road, go past Ryukyu Middle School, and you'll go all the way up to what's called Melville Avenue or Melville Drive. Take a left there and take an immediate left on Emirate Court. There you'll see in front of you is the monument that designates the surrender site. There's also temporary cemeteries on Kadena. They're no longer in existence, but they did have bodies interred from about 1945 to 1948. After 1948, the bodies were disinterred and returned either to the Punch Bowl, which is the National Cemetery in Honolulu, Hawaii, or returned to their homes of origin. The only site that you can see for temporary cemetery marker is over by the 353rd SOG. It's off the road right across from the 82nd Reconnaissance Squadron. There's the final tally for the price. You have 12,000 total killed for all of U.S. forces that took part in the invasion. A total of 65,000 casualties overall, with the Imperial Japanese anywhere from 100 to 110,000. As I mentioned, civilians estimates range from 90 to 150,000. Equipment lost, largest amount is Japanese aircraft, and this is due to the kamikaze attacks. Thank you for listening. I hope you can have some fun exploring Kadena Air Base and also Okinawa. Get out there and try to find these places. You'll enjoy your stay here on Okinawa much more, learning more about the history. Thank you.